Hello. The practice of cryopreserving immature testicular tissue from young prepubertal boys is a new practice happening only the past several years. And not everybody knows about it, and many who know have not accepted it completely. Although still experimental, it carries with it a lot of promise and at the same time a lot of ethical issues that many should understand to be able to grasp the viability of such a demanding procedure. Hello, my name is Professor Virgilio Novero. I'm an IVF specialist from the Philippines, and I like to navigate this topic for you in Aspire's edition of Ed Talks. With me is Professor Klaus Yiding Anderson, Professor Emeritus of Human Reproductive Physiology from the University of Copenhagen. He's one of the pioneers in the field of fertility preservation, and he has headed a national program in cryopreserving ovarian tissues and testicular tissues. And he has had around 500 researches cited, over 29,000 citations in different researches. And he's currently the editor of the reproduction portion of Frontiers of Endocrinology. Hello, Professor Anderson.
Hello.
Let's get started in this very interesting topic. So, Professor Anderson, why does one need to preserve immature testicular tissues from prepubertal boys?
This is their only chance, basically, to become biological fathers when they grow up. If they lose the ability to produce sperm cells, they won't stand a chance to be able to fertilize an oocyte when they grow up. And they don't produce sperm when they are prepubertal. The cells which has the capacity to produce sperm cells are resting in the testis as so-called spermatogonial stem cells. But they do not advance, and they do not finish meiosis or the ability to produce viable sperm cells. So if they, for whatever reason, lose all the spermatogonial stem cells before they enter puberty and start to produce sperm cells themselves, they have lost the opportunity to become a biological father.
And the most common reasons that they will potentially lose their spermatogonial stem cells is when they have cancer.
This is certainly, if they have a cancer, then to combat the cancer cells, you provide them with gonadotoxic drugs, which then will kill the cancer. But in the same process, all the spermatogonial stem cells are killed, which means that when they are gone, then there is no chance to produce sperm cells in adulthood. But there's other prepubertal boys which may benefit from this procedure. And this is boys which have undescended testes, which are sitting in the abdomen, and then they receive too much heat, and then the spermatogonial stem cells, they need to have a cooler climate in the scrotum, and if they don't have that, then they disappear. So it actually do turn out that boys with what we call bilateral cryptorchidism, where both testes are sitting in the abdomen, then up to half of them may actually become infertile in adult life. And they now receive an operation in which the testicular testes are removed to the scrotum in early years, so often before 1 year or 1.5 years. And at that point, you still have spermatogonial stem cells, and they're having the operation anyway. And often they have a biopsy taken from the testes to see if there's any malignancies in there. And there's no additional harm taking a biopsy and putting in the tank. And this is now, we do this for boys in Denmark. This is now an offer to all those who want to do that. So this is an additional source of boys. And then there's also boys who have various diseases. They may not be cancer. If they have thalassemia, sickle cell anemia, they may require bone marrow transplantation in order to get the right kind of red blood cells. That therapy is also very gonadotoxic. So there's actually a whole variety of patients, as for women with ovarian tissue freezing, which may benefit from this procedure.
So there are reasons because of cancer to avoid the gonadotoxic cancer therapy. Then there's also benign hematologic disease, and also like thalassemia. And then there's also other conditions like what did you say? Uh,
Prepubertal.
Shortidism, yes. So there are benign and malignant causes which will probably necessitate cryopreservation of immature tissues. So, are there situations similar to these that are not necessarily indicated for ovarian tissue, for testicular tissue cryopreservation?
Of course, if the boy is pubertal and start to produce sperm cells, then of course this is, and this is in contrast to women, that then you actually have an opportunity to freeze the sperm cells, and often you have an abundance of sperm cells. So this may secure the fertility of this boy in adulthood. So this is a difference between women. So it often is very young boys who are unable to produce sperm. But now the field is opening up, and there is actually also quite a lot of adult men who do not produce sperm and who actually have spermatogonia stem cells in their testes. But somehow the cells surrounding the stem cells, the whole milieu in the testes, do not support sperm cell production. And we are now studying these men, non-obstructive azoospermia patients, and are looking into what are the mechanisms for the arrest. And if we can sort of figure out, do we need adult Sertoli cells, which are normally functioning, to start the process? We are also looking into whether this will be of a benefit. And of course, then these men, if they come around early, could have a biopsy taken out and frozen, and then we will take it and do something in the lab to initiate the process, either in vitro or in vivo later on.
Earlier, I mentioned that testicular tissue cryopreservation in prepubertal boys is still an experimental procedure. Can you explain that point a little bit more? Why is it still
Yeah.
experimental?
Yeah, no, this is for sure experimental, and this is very important that you put this forward to the patient's parents so that they have a full information of what's going on. It is like that these boys are very young, and actually they don't come back to have to use their sperm cells or their spermatogonia stem cells perhaps in the next 20 years. So we haven't done a single procedure. There's now reports that one procedure in America has been done, transplanting back the spermatogonia stem cells. So this is an evolving field, but this is because we have had tissue in the tank in liquid nitrogen now for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're only coming back now. But now it's actually becoming pertinent, and there's a lot of clinics in Europe who are now planning to do transplantation. But we haven't done it. We don't know whether it works. And of course, it's very important to state to the parents that this is so experimental that we haven't done it. All the experimental animals in which this has been performed, this is rats, this is mice, this is goats, this is cows, monkeys, it all works. In any of these species, this has resulted in renewed spermatogenesis and at least cells which could be used for assisted reproduction and generating biological offspring. So we do expect this to be true in humans as well, but we haven't done it. And of course, this is an extremely important information to put forward to the parents.
Okay, so talking about the ongoing research, because you did mention that there seems to be a lot of progress in animal studies for testicular, immature testicular tissue cryopreservation. So, for humans, what is the future like in terms of having this applied clinically for our cases of testicular tissue cryopreservation?
There's probably several. There's probably several different options which may be envisioned. One is that you have had a biopsy taken out as a very young boy where you didn't produce sperm cells, so you haven't had any progress of the process in your own testes. Then we would take out and then disintegrate this piece of tissue together with all the spermatogonia stem cells, and then basically inject that into the reader testis, and from the reader testis out into the seminiferous tubules. And what happens is that it appears that the spermatogonia stem cells basically find their niche at the bottom of the testicular tubules, and then settle and say, this is the right environment. Then they're sitting there, and then they start to proliferate, and then they will initiate spermatogenesis, so that we will have in vivo production of sperm cells. The other alternative, and this we can also envision that we would take the whole piece of tissue and put in. So this is perhaps 10, 15, 50, 100 milligram of testis tissue. But this would include all the cells from that testis. So this is the seminiferous tubules, the peritubular cells, the Leydig cells, and whatever we have. And then it comes into the individual, and the hormones, the FSH and LH, will now secure that the different processes needed for sperm cell production.
That's what you call a graft? Is that what you call a graft? Yeah.
Yes, this is what and this has been done now very elegantly by Kylie Orwick and his group in Pittsburgh on monkeys. And they have produced several monkeys from this technique. So they take out the prepubertal tissue, they freeze it, put it back in the scrotum, underneath the skin of the scrotum, and then leave it there. And then you actually have renewed spermatogenesis to take place. So this is one option also. So there is the third option is that we now actually understand how spermatogenesis is regulated. So we take out the tissue and then in vitro stimulate the spermatogonia stem cells to initiate the processes leading to sperm cells. And then
in vitro maturation. In vitro maturation.
Yes, exactly. Then we would have the spermatids in the dish, and then we can use that for ICSI, and then we can inject it, and then we can actually start the process of embryogenesis. So there's 3 different options available, and there's a lot of research going on in each of these categories, actually.
So even though it is considered experimental, hopes are high that the actual utilization of these immature tissues will be operational or utilizable in the very near future.
It is so. That's, I mean, we have done the first patient in Denmark where we have transplanted back testicular tissue. This was an adult man with non-obstructive azoospermia and left the tissue there for half a year. Certainly it survived, and the spermatogonia stem cells were still there, but we didn't succeed in producing haploid spermatids we could use for ICSI. But this is the first test, and we are now planning to do more tests, and I can assure you that there is probably, I would imagine that there is 5, 6 clinics in Europe which are planning to do clinical studies. And that also reflects that these prepubertal boys who were perhaps just a few years old when the tissue was frozen are now coming back and saying, okay, I'm 25, now can you do something? And but of course, this is very early days, and we will need to see how this comes out. But clinical trials will start.
So it seems that it's being practiced all over the world now, even though it's still in the experimental phase.
Yeah, this is, I'm that old. I remember when ICSI was introduced in 1992. Yes. And a lot of men actually came back to us and said, hey, why didn't you freeze my sperm? I could have benefited from that now. And of course, we do say to the patients, this is experimental, but if we do not freeze your child's tissue, there's no chance. And we have actually conducted a survey among the parents who have had their boys' tissue frozen, and 95%, there's just 1 or 2 who actually says, no, this is not of interest for us. All the rest, they're very keen. We actually now have small boys who have cryptorchidism, have the operation, do not have a biopsy taken, but the parents come back when it looks, the hormonal things don't look as if he is going to be able to produce sperm in adulthood. They come back themselves and say, can you do an additional surgical procedure to cryopreserve his tissue? So the patients, the parents are very interested. So this is, I mean, that's always a good starting point, isn't it? But we can't promise anything.
Yes. So in Denmark, it is not so difficult to propose experimental testicular tissue cryopreservation for young boys at this point, is it?
This is completely free of cost for them. And
Yes.
we are saying this is an experimental procedure. We do not promise you anything. The only thing we can say, if you do not do it and your boy is unable to produce sperm, he cannot be a biological father. Here there is a chance. We don't know how much it is. We don't want to promise you anything, but this is the idea, and there's no additional side effects from it and so on. It's not like the testis we take half a testis. It's just a tiny biopsy. So I think that this is one way, at least, to approach it, to say that we do not do any harm, but we don't promise anything, but there is a potential.
Very good. So I think it comes. It's obvious that the procedure, although experimental, is something that we must propose as their only option to potentially have children in the future when they grow up. Because if they don't do it, they lose the chance altogether.
Yes, that's the idea, and of course you can have donation of sperm cells from a different man and all those things, but it is very important, as for women, to have their own biological children, and this is now an option which is coming. And I can tell you that at this point, more than 3,000 boys worldwide have had a biopsy frozen. Wow. And it's just increasing. We're having more and more boys coming around. There are even places now out there in the big world where you freeze more testis tissue than you freeze ovarian tissue. So it's coming.
Very good, very good. Professor Anderson, I have so many more questions, but we're out of time. And so I only have time to ask you any take-home message for these patients or their parents who may be indicated for testicular tissue cryopreservation. Any message from you?
Yeah, no, the take-home message is the technique works. We can freeze testicular tissue. We have surviving spermatogonia stem cells. Get the program started and be flat honest to the patients to say, we haven't done it, but we do know we will have spermatogonia stem cells for your boys when he grows up. If we can use it, there's 10, 15 years for research to progress. I would be surprised that in 10, 15 years, we didn't have a clinical procedure. So I think it's worthwhile starting now.
Thank you, Professor Anderson. In closing, I'd like to say that fertility preservation of immature testicular tissues from prepubertal boys is an expanding practice worldwide. The future is bright for utilizing these immature tissues in the future, although nothing promised as of now. But the future is great, and I think we should probably advocate this to our patients. Don't promise them anything, but the future is very, very positive. With that, I thank everyone for listening in, and thank you again, Professor Anderson, for this very, very interesting edition of Ed Talks. See you next time.